Welcome back to my YouTube channel, folks. It's Australia Day. It's going to be quite a warm day today, a bit of a breeze here at the moment. You can see the Australian bush there going down into the national park. Nice walking trail down there. Lots of wildlife, birds, snakes, kangaroos down there. So this is a quintessential Australian bush in some ways, not far from Adelaide. Now, recently someone went missing just down there. I don't know whether they found him or not, but disappeared. And so I thought that would be a good lead into one of the famous stories about the Australian bush and of some people gone missing. And you might have guessed it's Picnic at Hanging Rock. Now, Picnic at Hanging Rock, I'll just come around this way a bit. Picnic at Hanging Rock is a famous Australian story. It was made into a very successful film, and it's very captivating. Hanging Rock is a place in Victoria near Mount Macedon. I've been there. It's quite an interesting place, quite mysterious in some ways. Lots of cliffs dropping off, and a lot of people used to go rock climbing there, I think. Anyway, recently I came across the algorithm sent to me a message or a video about speculating about Hanging Rock once again, because some people think it was based on a true story, and some people think it's pure fiction. I think it's pure fiction, and I'm going to explain why when I go inside. I have these two books here. See if I can show them to you. This one here is the illustrated Picnic at Hanging Rock, a beautiful book if you can get hold of it, and it's got the whole story in there and worth reading. And there are 17 chapters in this book. Now, the author actually wrote 18 chapters, and she speculated that she wouldn't let the last chapter be published until after she died. And so this is the last chapter. I found this in my favourite second-hand bookshop sometime back a little while ago, and I'm going to share some stuff from that in a minute. I'm going to go inside and just share some things that are written in here, and you can make up your own mind about the Picnic at Hanging Rock. I made up my mind a long time ago, and especially after reading this chapter. So I'll just stop here now and I'll go inside and complete the rest of this. Okay, now we're inside. So this is the Picnic at Hanging Rock book by Joan Lindsay, and this is a beautiful illustrated edition, and the actual movie was filmed at Martindale Hall in South Australia, which I've actually been to there. It's Martindale Hall. And it's a very mysterious story. I'll probably find a link I can put underneath to show you how you can see some of the movie, if not all of it, on YouTube. And it's about these schoolgirls in this school, and they go on a picnic at Hanging Rock. Now, Martindale Hall is nowhere near Hanging Rock. Martindale Hall is in South Australia, but and Hanging Rock is over in Victoria, near Mount Macedon. But it's a beautiful setting in the movie, and it works really well. And the film was made by Peter Weir, who was I think it was his second film. He was a famous Australian director, producer. I'm not sure his total role, but he put this movie together, was the driving force behind it. And so that's a little bit about the movie. Now, lots of people speculated. She never told anyone when people tried to ask her whether this was based on a true story, whether it was fiction or fact, and are the girls still missing out there somewhere. She never would tell anyone. And you'll find out some of the reasons why in a minute. It became a very successful book, and an even more successful movie probably, and the success of it is probably largely due to the fact that it was a mystery and no one has ever solved it, or seemingly so. So anyway, there was 17 chapters. Don't know what it says on the last page here. Yeah, chapter 17, there's an extract from a newspaper dated the 14th of February 1913. So this is I'll give you a little bit of an extract from this was written, this is in chapter 17. Extract from a Melbourne newspaper dated 14th of February 1913. Although St. Valentine's Day is usually associated with the giving and taking of presents and affairs of the heart, it is exactly 13 years when this was written since that fatal Saturday when a party of some 20 schoolgirls and 2 governesses set out from Appleyard College on the Bendigo Road for a picnic to Hanging Rock. One of the governesses and 3 of the girls disappeared during the afternoon. Only one of them was ever seen again. The Hanging Rock is a spectacular volcanic uprising on the plains below Mount Macedon, of special interest to geologists on account of its unique rock formation, and lots of caves and bottomless holes. It was thought at the time that the missing persons had attempted to climb the dangerous rock escarpments near the summit, where they presumably met their death, but whether by accident, suicide or straight-out murder has never been established since the bodies were never recovered. Intensive search by police and public of the relatively small area provided no clue to the mystery until on the morning of Saturday, 21st of February, the Honourable Michael Fitzhubert, a young Englishman holidaying at Mount Macedon, now domiciled on a station property in northern Queensland, discovered one of the 3 missing girls. It goes on and on with all this so-called newspaper article, and maybe it's there or maybe it's not. But anyway, a somewhat shadowy figure appears briefly in this extraordinary story, a girl called Edith Horton, a 14-year-old boarder at Appleyard College, who had accompanied the 3 other girls for a short distance up the rock. The girl returned at dusk to the other picnickers by the creek below in a state of hysteria, and I was unable then or even after to recall anything whatsoever that had occurred during the interval. In spite of repeated inquiries over the years, Miss Horton recently died in Melbourne without having provided any additional information. And so chapter 17 puts a bit of speculation on it. But then I discovered this. This is the missing chapter, the chapter that was never published, chapter 18. And the never before published final chapter of the picnic at Hanging Rock. I'll take this out of its packet. I was so excited when I saw this in the second-hand bookshop. There you go, the never before published final chapter. And this is by a man called John Taylor. And he mentions about Joan Lindsay in chapter 18, and then he makes a commentary on chapter 18 by Yvonne Rousseau, who wrote a book called Murder at Hanging Rock. And she speculated on all that too. So I'll just read a little bit of the introduction here. Okay. Joan Lindsay's Picnic at Hanging Rock has been read by several million people in English, French, Spanish and Italian, and the film version seen by tens of millions. As a novel, its appeal came chiefly from 2 things: the way it combined mysterious and sinister events with a picture of the period drawn with loving nostalgia, and the fact that the mystery was left unsolved. The central story can be briefly summarised. A party of schoolgirls goes on a picnic on St. Valentine's Day, 1900. 4 of them leave the group to explore the Hanging Rock. One of the schoolmistresses also wanders off. When they do not return in time, a search is organised. The youngest girl emerges from the hillside in hysterics, but can recall almost nothing. Of the other 3 girls and the mistresses, there is no trace. A week later, one of the girls is found on the rock with a few cuts and bruises on her hands and face, but her bare feet unmarked and no memory of where she has been. Such an unlikely plot could never work except in the hands of a writer of remarkable talent. It is perhaps because we are so convinced of the reality of the time, place, and people that we can accept the mystery for what it is. Joan Lindsay wrote with a sharpness of observation, a shrewdness of insight, and a humour which carries us to the puzzling conclusion. We do not feel cheated because such a writer doesn't cheat. There have been attempts to explain the unsolved mystery by suggesting that it was inspired by a book, A Passage to India, E.M. Forster's A Passage to India, which includes the Malabar Caves incident. And that's described in a book called The Ghosts of Versailles. There is no evidence that Joan Lindsay ever read that book. Her own account was that the story just came to her in stages as she lay awake at night, to be written at high speed the next day. But what came to her did include the ending, and although we were not cheated, we were misled. Joan Lindsay kept silent on the subject of the final chapter for the sake of her publishers and the film makers. However, she expressed a clear wish that it should be published after her death. In the light of this, it seems absurd that many people have argued that it should not be published, as if they had a better knowledge than the author or a right to overrule her. However, many thousands of others have begged to know the secret, and they have it now with the author's consent. When to please her publisher, Joan Lindsay agreed to remove the final chapter. It was not the only change she made. At the beginning of the novel, there is a note by the author. Whether Picnic at Hanging Rock is fact or fiction, my readers must decide for themselves. As the fateful picnic took place in the year 1900 and all the characters who appear in this book are long since dead, it hardly seems important. But after writing it, she ordered it to read fact or fiction or both. The words were never included, but one can ponder them. People have spent many hours searching through old newspapers and records hoping to find the facts. Yvonne Rousseau, in her remarkable scholarly spoof, The Murders at Hanging Rock, showed that an astonishing number of solutions could be made to seem plausible by combining fact with fiction. Picnic at Hanging Rock is remarkable for the fact that it is the only one of Joan Lindsay's works to contain any dates at all. One should not be surprised to find them ambiguous. I'll just read on a little bit here. Chapter 18 of Picnic at Hanging Rock has been the subject of a great deal of nonsense. Joan Lindsay wrote it as part of her novel, intending it to be published. Whether it would have spoiled the story to include it is a question for each reader to decide. The publisher's readers, thought it should be deleted. It was a purely literary decision. But historians might well decide that its indirect result was the creation of the Australian film industry as we know it. But it is because it is highly unlikely there would have been such a rush to buy the film rights in 1972 if Chapter 18 had not been deleted. As anyone can see, the chapter, I'll read you a little bit of it in a minute, is quite unfilmable, although in these days of special effects you would be able to do it. Film can work only with what God gives it, and God did not give it the same elasticity. He granted the novel through people keep trying. He granted the novel, this is God he's talking about, the author, though people keep trying, as the cutting room floor forever shows. I understand that one of the greatest sequences ever filmed was Mrs. Appleyard rushing up the Hanging Rock between a raging bushfire and an approaching thunderstorm on her way to commit suicide. But God has decreed that you can show just so many people climbing a given rock in one picture, and the editor's decision was final. What we saw was a subtitle. Joan gave me the manuscript of Chapter 18 in December 1972 to my considerable surprise. As promotions manager for her publisher, Chessier in Melbourne, I had the unwelcome task of dealing with the various people who were seeking to buy the film rights. It was not part of my job and I knew little about it. Eventually I discovered that Pat Lovell and Peter Weir were the best contenders, and I took them to meet Lady Lindsay at her house, Mulberry Hill. As usual, Joan made up her mind instantly that they were the right people and we might as well have left after 5 minutes. However, we spent a pleasant afternoon chatting and looking at her pictures and being charmed by her, an effect she produced without the slightest effort of artifice. Being a professional publishing person, I naturally hadn't even actually read the book. I was therefore puzzled by some of the conversation, which was about some kind of unsolved mystery. I nodded wisely and told myself I better get hold of a copy and read it over the weekend, which I did. The next time I saw Joan, I mentioned that I had noticed a few things that didn't add up and had drawn some conclusions. "Ah," she said, "you're one of the very few people who've noticed that." I felt pleased that I had joined a small club. A few months later, Joan took me aside after lunch at her club with some of her friends. She produced the wad of manuscript and said, "I'm giving this to you because you're the only one who ever worked out the secret." "But Lady just told me at lunch that she knew the secret." "Lady someone," I protested. "Oh, she didn't work it out," said Joan. "She just nagged and nagged and I had to tell her." Well, they were old friends. So I'm just going to cut now to the chapter 18 itself. If I can find it. And you'll see how, in many ways, she wrote as if she was away with the fairies, or the people that went missing were away with the fairies. It is happening now. This is chapter 18. This is how it starts. It is happening now. This is not all of it. As it has been happening ever since Edith Horton ran stumbling and screaming towards the plain. As it will go on happening until the end of time. The scene is never varied by so much as the falling of a leaf or the flight of a bird. To the four people on the rock, it was always acted out in the tepid twilight of a present without a past. Their joys and agonies are forever new. Miranda is a little ahead of Irma and Marion as they push on through the dogwoods, her straight yellow hair swinging loose as corn silk about her thrusting shoulders. Like a swimmer, cleaving wave after wave of dusty green, an eagle hovering in the zenith sees an unaccustomed stirring of lighter patches amongst the scrub below. And the eagle takes off for higher, pure airs. At last, the bushes are thinning out before the face of a little cliff that holds the last light of the sun. So on a million summer evenings, the pattern forms and reforms upon the crags and pinnacles of the hanging rock. I've actually taken a few photos there years ago on film. The plateau on which they presently emerge from the scrub had much the same conformation as the lower down boulders, loose stones and occasional stunted tree. Clumps of rubbery ferns stirred faintly in the pale light. The plain below was infinitely vague and distant. Peering down between the ringing boulders, they could just make out tiny figures coming and going through the drifts of rosy smoke. A dark shape that might have been a vehicle beside the glint of a water. Whatever can those people be doing down there, scuttling about like a lot of busy little ants? Marianne came and looked over Irma's shoulder. A surprising number of human beings are without purpose, Irma giggled. I dare say they think themselves quite important. The ants and their fires were dismissed without further comment, although Irma was aware for a little while of a rather curious sound coming up from the plain, like the beating of far-off drums. Miranda had been the first to see the monolith, a single outcrop of stone, something like a monstrous egg rising smoothly out of the rocks ahead, above a precipitous drop to the plain. Irma, a few feet behind the other two, saw them suddenly halt, swaying a little, with heads bent and hands pressed to their breasts, as if to steady themselves against a gale. What is it, Marion? Is anything the matter? Marian's eyes were fixed and brilliant, her nostrils dilated, and Irma thought vaguely how like a greyhound she was. Irma, don't you feel it? Feel what, Marion? Not a twig was stirring on the little dried-up trees. The monolith, pulling like a tide. It's just about pulling me inside out, if you want to know. As Marion Quaid seldom joked, Irma was afraid to smile, especially as Miranda was calling back over her shoulder. What side do you feel it strongest, Marion? I can't make it out. We seem to be spiralling on the surface of a cone, all directions at once. Mathematics again. When Marion Quaid was particularly silly, it was usually something to do with sums. Irma said lightly, sounds to me more like a circus. Come on, girls, we don't want to stand staring at that great thing forever. I'll just read on a bit of this. I know it's a little bit long. I'm not going to read the whole thing. As soon as the monolith was passed out and out of sight, all three were overcome by an overpowering drowsiness. Lying down in a row on the smooth floor of a little plateau, they fell into a sleep so deep that a lizard darted out from under a rock and lay without fear in the hollow of Marion's outflung arm, while several beetles in bronze armour made a leisurely tour of Miranda's yellow head. Miranda woke first to a colourless twilight in which every detail was intensified, every object clearly defined and separate. A forsaken nest wedged in the fork of a long-dead tree, with every straw and feather intricately laced and woven. Marion's torn muslin skirts fluted like a shell, Irma's dark ringlets standing away from her face in exquisite wiry confusion. The eyelashes drawn in bold sweeps on the cheekbones. Everything, if you could only see it clearly enough like this, is beautiful and complete. Everything has its own perfection. A little brown snake, dragging its scaly body across the gravel, made a sound like a wind passing over the ground. The whole air was clamorous with microscopic life. Irma and Marion were still asleep. Miranda could hear the separate beating of their two hearts like two little drums, each at a different tempo. And in the undergrowth, beyond the clearing, a crackling and snapping of twigs where a living creature moved unseen towards them through the scrub. It drew nearer. The crunchings and cracklings split the silence as the bushes were pushed violently apart, and a heavy object was propelled from undergrowth almost onto Miranda's lap. It was a woman with a gaunt, raddled face, trimmed with a bushy black eyebrows, a clown-like figure, dressed in a torn calico camisole and long calico drawers frilled below the knees of two stick-like legs, feebly kicking out in black lace-up boots. "Through," gasped the wide-open mouth, and again, "Through." The tousled head fell sideways, the blooded eyes closed. "Poor thing, she looks ill," Irma said. "Where does she come from?" "Put your arm under her head," Miranda said, "while I unlace her stays." Freed from the confining husk with her head pillowed on a folded petticoat, the stranger's breath became regular. The strange expression left her face, and presently she rolled over on the rocks and slept. "Why don't we all get out of these absurd garments?" Marion asked. "After all, we have plenty of ribs to keep us vertical." No sooner were the 4 pairs of corsets discarded on the stones, and a delightful coolness and freedom set in. Then Marion's sense of order was affronted. Everything in the universe has its appointed place, beginning with the plants. "Yes, Irma, I meant it. You needn't giggle, even our corsets on the hanging rock." "Well, you won't find a wardrobe," Irma said, "however hard you look. Where can we put them?" Miranda suggested throwing them over the precipice. "Give them to me." "Which way did they fall?" Marion wanted to know. "I was standing right beside you, but I couldn't tell." "You didn't see them fall because they didn't fall." The precise croaking voice came at them like a trumpet from the mouth of the clown woman on the rock, now sitting up and looking perfectly comfortable. "I think, girl, that if you turn your head to the right and look about level with your waist," they all turned their heads to the right, and sure enough, there were the corsets becalmed on the windless air like a fleet of little ships. Miranda had picked up a dead branch long enough to reach them and was lashing out at the stupid things, seemingly glued to the background of grey hair. "Let me try," Marion said. "Whack, whack. They must be stuck fast in something I can't see." "If you want my opinion," croaked the stranger, "they are stuck fast in time. You with the curls, what are you staring at?" "I didn't mean to stare, only when you said that about time, I had such a funny feeling that I'd met you somewhere a long time ago." "Anything is possible until it is proved impossible, and sometimes even then." The scratchy voice had a convincing ring of authority. "And now, since we seem to be thrown together on a plane of common experience, I have no idea why. May I have your names?" And I won't read on, but the story goes into even more fantasy and strange things, which things morphing into other things, which could only be done with today's special effects, and they would have had trouble doing all this, filming all that chapter in the book. So it's quite obvious that the publishers chose not to publish that because people would start thinking this is just pure fantasy and it's not based on a true story, and they were going to sell more copies of the book if they thought it was going to be a true story. Anyway, that's my take on it. She was a mysterious sort of a lady, or a strange lady, Joan Lindsay, as were the whole Lindsay family, really, if you read about them. And I'm not being derogatory about them. They were just an artistic family. Anyway, so there you go. So my take on the mystery of the picnic of Hanging Rock is it's no mystery, it's just fiction and nothing actually really happened. There's some more interesting things in that book, so see if you can get hold of a copy of yourself of that The Secret Book of Hanging Rock, and you'll find some more interesting reading in it as well. So I hope you've been interested in this edition of on my YouTube channel. And I did say on the other channel where I found the article, it was a very well produced YouTube video about the whole making of Hanging Rock and the story. So you might like to look at that, that's quite good. And I did make in the comments, I said I've got this book and I'll make my own YouTube channel about it, so now I have. So thanks for watching, like if you like, subscribe if you wish, and I'll see you next time.